Hello, my name is Jennifer Kurtanis, Director of the Farmington Valley Health District, and your host for this segment of Health Matters, a public health education program produced by the Farmington Valley Health District. Today we are going to talk about West Nile virus and other mosquito-borne illnesses. In New England, as we begin to enjoy more time outdoors, we also become increasingly aware of the nuisances bugs play when we try and get outside, especially those biting insects like mosquitoes. Unfortunately, mosquitoes are not just a nuisance. Some carry diseases that can make us sick. During the summer and early fall in Connecticut, we often hear most about West Nile virus. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Philip Armstrong, a medical entomologist with the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, to help us better understand what West Nile virus is, what we should do to protect ourselves from the illness, and what other mosquito-borne illnesses might be an issue for us living here in Connecticut. So welcome, thank you very much for being here. So just to start, can you tell us a little bit about the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station and your role in helping us better understand mosquito-borne illnesses?
So the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station is a state agency dedicated to protecting agriculture, the environment, and public health. So we run both research programs and public service programs. And I run a statewide mosquito surveillance program where we trap and test mosquitoes in locations, in some 91 locations statewide, and test them for viruses that cause human illness like West Nile virus.
So I imagine testing mosquitoes is really important because that's kind of the first sign that we have that there are viruses that could be transmitted from a mosquito to a human?
That's correct. So the mosquito testing is an early warning system. So it allows us to look for virus amplification in the mosquito population, and it gives us early indicators of human risk. So usually we don't hear about human cases until well after the fact. So in order to have an effective, proactive monitoring system, it pays to really trap and test the mosquitoes themselves.
Right. So this time of year, we're beginning to hear a lot about West Nile virus and positive mosquitoes. Can you tell us a little bit about how we know that there are positive mosquitoes and why we're looking at this time of year?
So typically with West Nile virus and the other mosquito-borne viruses like Eastern Equine Encephalitis virus, they occur in late summer. So usually there's a period of virus amplification that goes on. So the mosquitoes pick up the virus by feeding them on birds. So birds are the source of infection in the mosquitoes. And so that takes many weeks for the virus to build up, and so we don't see it until now, typically, and that's why. And we expect that virus activity will last from now until really the first hard frost, which is usually October. So
mosquitoes don't live beyond a hard frost?
Yeah, typically there's a killing frost that will knock them down. They'll start to decline even before the hard frost, but that's usually what does them in.
Yeah. So how do we know, I see you have a few little contraptions to your right, so how do we know that mosquitoes are, in fact, that this amplification has occurred and that there has been the transmission of West Nile virus from birds to mosquitoes, which then puts the public at risk?
Yeah, so what we have here, what we do is we set traps overnight at locations, I said some 91 locations statewide. This is one of the traps that I have holding up. It's called the Cdc Light Trap, and it's simply, you have a cooler where you put dry ice up on top, and that emits carbon dioxide. So mosquitoes, one of the sensory cues that they use to find hosts or people to feed on is carbon dioxide that we exhale when breathing. So when people ask me, well, how can I prevent mosquitoes from biting me? Well, one solution would be to stop breathing, but
yeah, not very
practical. Also, we have skin odorants too that they're attracted to, but this trap just uses carbon dioxide as a bait. We also have a light and a fan at the part of the trap in the middle, which attracts them, and then they get sucked into the collection net below. So this collects host-seeking female mosquitoes. So it's the females that feed on blood, and they require them for reproduction.
Okay.
So that's one of the traps we use. And I don't know if you can see it, but I have down below here the gravid trap, which tracks females that are looking to lay eggs. And so at the base of the trap, we fill it with water, which we call stinky water, which is just hay infusion water that they like.
Are attracted to?
Attracted to, and it's the mosquitoes that transmit West Nile virus that are particularly attracted to those traps. So if you're out hiking, you may encounter these traps out in the woods or in the parks. We have those running overnight. They're brought back to our lab. The mosquitoes then are brought back the next morning to our labs in New Haven. They're identified to the species level. We have some 50 different mosquito species here in Connecticut. And they're sorted into tubes for virus testing. And then we test them the next day to see what viruses they're carrying.
So you mentioned, well, a couple things. There is a trapping network across the state. Do we have any trapping locations in the Farmington Valley?
Yeah, so we have one in Farmington, and I believe there is one.
Barkhamsted
is the other one, yes, that's correct. And then we have number of traps also in the greater Hartford area.
Right. So I know as the health director, I periodically look to you to see where the positive mosquitoes are showing up. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I tend to see the positive mosquitoes in general begin down in the southern part of the state and kind of move their way up. And so it's helpful to me to see what's happening in those testing stations across, so I know it's just a matter of time, or yes, those positive mosquitoes are in the vicinity and we need to start talking to people about precautions that they can take, etc. So you mentioned mosquitoes as the sentinel event, so it really is important that we have the mosquito trapping, because that lets us know we need to really be gearing up our efforts around personal protection, etc. What happens when you begin to identify positive mosquito pools? Do you work with local health departments? Do you work with the state? How do we communicate that?
So the data that we generate from the mosquito testing program, we work very closely with Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and Department of Public Health at the state level. And so we inform them of our findings. And usually the Department of Public Health will contact local health authorities if they detect it in their jurisdiction. So that information then gets relayed to the local level right away. We also put out periodic press releases warning the public of where the risks lie, where the hot spots are, and what sort of protection measures they can take to reduce their risk. And finally, we work with the towns on mosquito control. So a lot of the towns contract out with mosquito control contractors, and will larvicide, and we'll work with them in trying to developing plans to reduce their risk.
Yeah. So you just mentioned larviciding, and you also talked about the trap that really attracts female mosquitoes that are ready to lay eggs. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance or the difference between larviciding, which I think is focused on trying to kill the eggs, versus when we might might have flying mosquitoes, and sometimes you hear about spraying.
Yeah, so there's two ways to really control mosquitoes, and so the mosquito life cycle, they spend half of their life in water, and so the immature stages of the mosquito, the larvae, the pupae, the eggs, hatch and develop in water before they become flying adults. So that is, for some mosquito species, that's a very convenient point of intervention. We can treat the water sources that are producing mosquito in great abundance. And so for West Nile virus, that mosquito often breeds in these storm drains that you see on the side of the road.
Right.
And so what we will often do is treat that standing water with larvicide, or it's an insecticide that will target that stage of the mosquito. That's usually the first line of defense. It's rare that we would actually be out spraying for the adults. Some towns do it more as a pest management issue.
Right.
But as a public health intervention, it's very rare that the state gets involved in spraying, although we have done it in the past, and that's usually when we have really cases clustering in space and time.
Right, right. Yeah, it's good to know we have different strategies, and the larviciding is one that is probably more common. Although you mentioned that there are many, many different species of mosquito. Do all mosquitoes carry West Nile virus, and do all mosquitoes have the same kind of habitat?
Yeah, so to a lot of people, a mosquito is a mosquito.
Yeah, to me, it's a pest that bites.
Yeah, exactly, and they don't care what it is. But for us, we like to know what species we're dealing with, because each of I said there were 50 different species here in Connecticut. They have very different natural histories, very different feeding behaviors, very different breeding habitats. Some breed in salt marshes, some breed in woodland pools, some breed in the little water that collects in containers around your home. So in terms of control, we need to know which mosquitoes are responsible for virus transmission. And here in Connecticut, there's just a few species that are really of concern in terms of public health that are transmitting West Nile virus. One is called the northern house mosquito. The species name is Culex pipiens, but it is the dominant vector of West Nile virus. So we can really focus our interventions on that one species, and it makes it much more, just more cost effective and more effective overall, too.
Right, right. I think that it's, for the general public, I mean, it's phenomenal that we have you as a research resource, and the research is taking place to really help us understand better which mosquitoes, because the more we understand about which mosquitoes, their life cycle, their breeding, etc., the more we can hone in on those real prevention, targeted prevention strategies. So that brings me to, what is it that the general public, if anything, can do to help around their homes, regarding, mosquito breeding habitats? Is there anything that we can do to potentially reduce those habitats and ultimately the mosquito population?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the species that's the major West Nile virus transmitter of West Nile virus is found in domestic habitats. So it breeds or develops. I said it develops in these underwater storm drains that are found along the side of the road, but also they breed in water that's found in containers, or if you have a bird bath, or if you have any sort of planters or containers around the home. Plugged rain gutters is another important source of this mosquito. So just making sure that water, you just want to dump the water or replenish the water once a week, and that will interrupt the developmental cycle of the mosquito. So that's what's really required, and that will do a great service to reducing the mosquito burden in your neighborhood. Also around the home, just making sure you have good screen doors are in good repair. That will also keep them out of the house. So that's another measure that you can take.
Great. So we've focused a fair amount on the mosquito as a carrier of West Nile virus. Why, from a human standpoint, is West Nile virus so important? What are the health implications and who's at greatest risk?
Yeah, so with West Nile virus, most people that get infected, a lot of people don't show symptoms, or if they have symptoms, it's a fever, it's a flu-like illness, and your immune system kicks in and takes care of the infection with little consequence. But for some people, and the cases that we really track in the state are the severe cases of West Nile virus infection, and that can present as a neuroinvasive disease, encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, or meningitis is another manifestation of that. And it can cause all sorts of really severe symptoms, including things like tremors, convulsions, paralysis, coma, death, and the fatality rate's about 5 to 10%. And the severity of illness really is age-related. So it's the more commonly found in the elderly. The really severe fatal cases are found in the elderly. And for people over the age of 50, your risk of developing severe disease goes way up. But that's not to say that all age groups can develop the neuroinvasive disease as well.
So the risk is out there to all. The consequences may be different depending on your age, your immune system, but for those that are compromised in some way or older, unfortunately, it can be a very, very serious, debilitating and potentially deadly.
Deadly, and for those that survive, they often have months to years of disability from it. So it's really a serious illness.
Now, getting back to personal protection, what is it that individuals can do to protect themselves from mosquito exposure to mosquito bites?
Sure. So really the first line of defense is personal protection, and for that, and particularly in late summer, this is the time when you want to start being proactive in taking these measures. And that includes things like just covering up, wearing long sleeve shirts and pants when outdoors. And if outdoors, particularly you want to avoid or limit your time outdoors in the evening hours. So the mosquitoes that transmit West Nile virus are most active at dusk and dawn and into the evening hours. So limiting your time outdoors at that period of time, or when you do go outdoors, cover up and wear a repellent as well. Any exposed skin surfaces you should apply repellent, and that will go a long way to reducing the number of mosquito bites.
Yeah. So often we get inquiries from people about the safety. We encourage the use of repellents that include DEET, which is a particular chemical that's been shown to be effective against mosquitoes, but people are worried about that. We tell folks that as long as they are using it as described in the manufacturer's label, and or applying it to clothing versus skin, that is a safe and effective way to deter mosquitoes, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So as long as you apply it according to the manufacturer's instructions, with DEET, you generally don't need to go higher than 30% DEET. Anything greater than 30% doesn't offer additional protection. Okay. When applying it, you want to apply it as directed, And when applying it to children, you want to make sure that they don't rub it in their mouth or, in their eyes. That's the main concern.
Sure. So we've talked a fair amount about West Nile virus, but there are other mosquito-borne illnesses. I know Zika certainly got a lot of attention nationally, particularly an issue down in Texas and Florida and some of the southern states. The implications of Zika virus to pregnant women and their unborn child is really quite grave in terms of the brain development.
Sure.
What do we know about mosquitoes that carry Zika as it relates to Connecticut? Is this something that we should be worried about?
Well, right now, viruses like Zika virus are diseases of travelers. So most of the Connecticut residents that have contracted Zika virus contracted it while traveling overseas. There is a risk of sexual transmission where a partner can return and infect their sexual partner. So certainly there are any protection measure that you would require for a sexually transmitted disease would apply for Zika virus, although it's primarily transmitted by mosquitoes in tropical countries where it is normally found. And the Zika virus is a new virus to the Western Hemisphere. It came over a couple years ago, introduced into Brazil, spread throughout the Caribbean, and has been largely confined to tropical parts of the world. Having said that, there is a hypothetical risk that somebody getting on the airplane could get infected and transmit the virus to our local mosquitoes. That hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
We do have a mosquito here called the Asian tiger mosquito, which is a known vector of Zika virus. And so we test for Zika virus. As part of our testing procedures, we do look for that, but we've never found it in our any
I
of our
was going to
samples.
ask. So it's good to know that we are at least testing for Zika to really track and monitor if it arrives.
Yeah,
in
if
this
it were
part of
to,
this.
I think we'd be in a position to pick it up.
Yeah.
And Zika, it's not just Zika virus, it's dengue virus. There's another virus called Chikungunya virus, all spread by the same mosquitoes and are spreading like wildfire in the tropics.
Those areas,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yes. So you mentioned a few other. So do we often learn about new mosquito-borne illnesses in the southern hemisphere? Is that kind of the pattern? They emerge there and then travel up, or is that too much of a generalization?
I'd say, yeah. I mean, the real disease burden, when we look globally, it's mainly in the tropics and the developing world where mosquito-borne diseases are the biggest issue. Having said that, we have a lot of viruses that are only found in eastern U.S., for example. There's another virus called Eastern Equine Encephalitis virus, which is endemic to this region. We find it here in Connecticut. Occasionally becomes an issue. And it's not a tropical, it's found in more temperate climates.
Yeah.
So.
I know we do test for Eastern Equine Encephalitis, or EEE. It has a very specific habitat, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's very focal, and it's the mosquito that transmits that virus is only found in freshwater swamps and special like hardwood swamps where you have large trees that provide the appropriate habitat for the larvae to develop. So it's pretty much found on the eastern, along the Rhode Island border, as one of the focal areas for that virus.
And that's something we're testing for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, I want to thank you very much for being here today and sharing your experience and expertise and the work of the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, and certainly helping us track and monitor and better understand these public health issues related to mosquitoes and the transmission of illness to humans. As discussed, we encourage everyone to take steps within their own yards to eliminate standing pools of water. As you learned today, the mosquitoes that carry West Nile virus tend to breed in very small amounts of water that you could have in your backyard, like flower pots, gutters, trash cans, etc. So regularly checking those and dumping those after rain periods can reduce the breeding habitat of mosquitoes and ultimately reducing the mosquito populations within your own communities. Maintaining swimming pools and fish ponds, also very important, just to make sure that those don't become a source of breeding for mosquitoes. And also protect yourselves. As was mentioned, if you are going to be spending time outdoors, dusk and dawn seem to be the periods of time where the mosquitoes that carry West Nile virus are most likely to feed. So wearing long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants, using mosquito repellent as directed on the manufacturer label are all ways you can reduce your risk of being bitten. So with that, I'd like to thank you again. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember, your greatest wealth is your health.